Okay, welcome to Evolvepreneur Podcast Channel. My very special guest today is Sarah St. John, who's also a fellow podcaster, and I think we've got a lot to talk about. So welcome, Sarah, to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. So let's just dig into your bio a little bit. It says here you're an entrepreneur, podcaster, online course creator and author, and you created several startups through her entrepreneurial journey of over a decade. So we've got a lot in common here, I think, to talk about. She currently owns a podcast production company called PodSeam, and she's also the host of Frugalpreneur, which is quite interesting to talk about the whole Evolvepreneur thing, building a business on a Bootstrapped Budget, which she aims to show people how to launch and manage online businesses on a budget. So, all right, this is probably right down our wheelhouse there. So welcome again. So how long have you been running the podcast for?
A couple years now. I think
Okay.
it was April of 2019 that I started that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you find it technically challenging? Is that where most people you find with podcasting, they get in the technical side and they just can't get past it and they just don't do it?
Actually, no, not really. It came pretty easily to me, and I was editing or I still actually edit and produce my own show, so I kind of do the whole thing. And I think a lot of people, when they start a podcast, it isn't even the recording that's so much the issue; it's the post-production that people have an issue with, the time and the technical skills and whatnot. And so I think that's why a lot of people pod fade, or that's the phrase that people use for when people start a podcast and then do a few episodes and then kind of fall off the face of the planet.
Yeah, it's like a burst of enthusiasm and then it's all over, right?
Right.
Because the way I kind of look at podcasting is I sort of look at, actually with most marketing, is what's the laziest way you can do it, right? Because if you can sustain it and do it, then it's fine. But if you've set yourself this, because I know a lot of people say, you got to do a podcast like every week or every day or whatever, and they just can't keep up with the schedule because they're not professional podcasters, right? They've come in to do something. Their life isn't doing podcasting, it's something else usually.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think just maintaining a podcasting schedule can be a challenge. Like, some people do like daily shows, which I don't know how they do that. Mine's a weekly show, but there's a week here or there where I don't put one out and whatnot, but I try to stay consistent.
Yeah. So I got my lazy approach to podcasting is I do 3 in a row. Like that might take 2-3 weeks. And then I just send out all 3 almost in one go, like one day after each other.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it's any secret to anything that works or anything like that, but back into the lazy mode, see, because it's easy to edit 3 podcasts and edit 1, right? So basically I edit 3, and my theory is that I've got 3 podcasters promoting it almost at the same time. So it's like threefold effect. That's the standard fact. 3 is my favourite number anyway, because I'm born on the 3rd, so there you go. But the idea is that's my whole concept. So I don't think at the end of the day, people get all wrapped up in that technical aspect of when they've got to produce a show and it's got to be produced every week and all that sort of stuff, because people don't follow those schedules anymore. Like,
yeah,
I know when I was a kid you had to watch TV at a certain time to see a show, but now it's like it doesn't matter anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, everyone's all like, be consistent, put it out on the same day every week, even the same time. But I'm kind of like, well, why does it even matter? Because if someone subscribed to your show, it's gonna automatically download whenever anyway, and next time they open the app, they're gonna see it. So
yeah, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
I also wonder too, like I get alerts every so often, so almost like Apple queues them up. And then I somehow go anywhere near that podcast app and then bang, 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 get a bunch of notifications. So I'm not even getting notified when the show actually comes out. That could have been days or weeks ago that it came out. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that might be a bit of a fallacy, or maybe it's just a way of trying to get people to follow a schedule, right? So, Frugalpreneur, that's an interesting so it's funny how the old preneur thing came out of everything, right?
Everyone's a blankpreneur now, it seems like.
Yeah, so I sort of like, we had a company called Evolve, and somehow along the line, I don't know, it came to me in the shower, I don't know, and it's sort of like, this sounds interesting, I'll just put these 2 together, and it kind of made sense.
I like it.
Yeah, so it's almost create your own word, right? It's a bit like Google.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the name of it really stood out to me when I saw your show and I was like, oh, I should try to get on that show.
Well, there
Yeah, yeah. Anything that ends in preneur for some reason
doesn't fit.
It speaks to me. Yeah.
So we're talking about like Frugalpreneur. Obviously, it comes into the whole on a budget because I think the biggest problem with entrepreneurs is they start off with very little money, and I think part of the problem there is that I think if you start with a lot of money, you could actually end up with little money because I think people blow it too. Like I've seen people blow a lot of money. I did some I've got a friend in LA and we did some filming on this show that this guy films. Like he does a whole TV show in his living room. Like his house is like he's a billionaire almost. So he basically got this really fancy house, and he's spending like $100,000 a month just on production, like doing these shows, getting these special guests in, and zero revenue coming out of it, zero.
Oh wow!
And what he was doing was he's building an audience. So he spent a whole year on this thing. And then he's launched an entire, coaching business and all that sort of stuff. So you see there was, he's not throwing his money away, right? Because from the outside world, it looked like he was. But he wasn't. It was a plan. But most people can't do that, right? And also be successful at it because you could have thrown a lot of money at that and then the whole thing would have failed. And for him, it's probably, chump change anyway, so it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, if an entrepreneur threw that much money at something and didn't get it to stick, then they'd be pretty upset. So do you think that podcasting is the quickest way for an entrepreneur to kind of get started? Is that, because that's kind of my opinion, is that if you want to start your marketing and you want to prove to people you know what you're talking about, then I think podcasting is the best place to go.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Because basically in 2008 is when I started my entrepreneurial journey. But I started with photography. And then it was getting so expensive, so I decided to switch to an online business model, and I tried a bunch of different things. And it was during that process that I discovered all these free and affordable tools and resources and software that people could use to manage an online business on a budget. And so then I got an idea to write a book called Frugalpreneur. And then I launched a podcast also called Frugalpreneur, but the initial intent was for the podcast to be an extra marketing avenue, and it was just going to be, a few episodes. But I was getting more traction and leverage with the podcast than the book, and I love the connections I was making and whatnot. And so I've kept the podcast up. But yeah, I think podcasting is definitely a good way to start a business, have a business on the back end of a podcast or vice versa. If you already have a business, adding podcasting to it as an extra marketing avenue, because the podcast directories are basically search engines, and Google is actually transcribing podcasts now. So if someone were to go to Google and search something, it's a possibility that a podcast episode will show up in the results. And yeah, Amazon is getting into podcasting, and just the popularity of podcasting has really skyrocketed, especially in the past year. And I think at a certain point, it's almost going to be if you have a business, it's going to be expected to have a podcast with your business. But I think even if you don't have a business yet, but you have an idea or a niche, to start a podcast on that and then see how it evolves. Evolvepreneur. Become an Evolvepreneur and start a podcast and see how that goes and what you can add on the back end of that to monetize it.
Because I think at the end of the day, podcasting is that you can test an idea, and if it doesn't work out, well, you can disappear the podcast, right? You can just it can completely go away. I think that's the thing. A lot of things, in today's environment is that you can basically disappear tomorrow. It doesn't stay there forever.
Right.
And so I think there's the risk. People think, if I don't like it or whatever, make a fool of myself. Well, at the end of the day, just delete it. No one will ever know, right? And the reality is that in the early days of when you do podcast episodes, the early days, hardly anybody will see or hear or listen to your show anyway. So it's not to me, it's get it out of the way, try to make sure you get it get the bad ones out of the way early on, then you don't have to worry about it then because you get experience. And I think everybody goes through that phase of like getting used to it and things going wrong and things like that. So, yeah. So do you, in terms of the way that you monetize that podcast you did, so you started off with this sort of side thing, and then it kind of looks like it ended up being your business, didn't it? So it's kind of the way it kind of happens sometimes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I had no intention of the podcast becoming even really a thing. It was just, I didn't even start listening to podcasts until like a year before I launched mine. And so, but yeah, you just never know what's going to stick, I guess, sometimes. And then now I was editing, or I still do edit and produce my own show, and people would compliment me on it. So I figured, well, why not get paid to do it for other people? So then I launched a podcast production agency, and now I'm working on a podcasting course, and I have a book about podcasting. So I'm all in on podcasting now, but took over a decade of trying this, that, and the other thing to get to that point. But yeah, it's interesting how something that wasn't even an intentional thing turned into the business, I guess.
So do you think the best way to do a podcast is do it off your own bat in terms of my lazy marketing thing is that I just find people to talk to. It's easier than coming up with content. Do you find that which is the better way to go about it? Is there a better way, create your own content, or is it better to have a bit of a plan to start with in terms of what the hell you're trying to achieve?
You mean like versus an interview style show versus
style, or should you try to produce? Because I think the biggest problem with most podcasters is that if you're going to be the only person on the show, then it's harder to kind of get that messaging right and harder to sort of get it done in some respects. As opposed to, because the moment I'm looking at launching another podcast for our app platform, Evolvepreneur.app platform, and it doesn't lend itself necessarily to a guest scenario. So I'm going to have to come up with content to do it. And I'll put that baby off a few times now because it's like I've got to sit down and really think about it. Whereas if I find someone's interesting on the show, then it's a pretty easy scenario because I can just go and do it. So I guess it depends on whether you like talking or not, right?
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to both. With an interview style, like you said, then you don't really have to create content. You just ask questions and go from there. Plus, I think the networking and whatnot is nice, and you never know, like you could collaborate with somebody in the future. I've noticed that that's been really helpful with my podcast, interviewing people or even being a guest on other shows, just the connections and whatnot. You never know what
comes out of it.
Yeah. So those are advantages. Whereas with like a solo show, like you're talking about, where you're creating your own content, basically it's just you. Yeah, the disadvantage, of course, is that you're having to come up with your own content, but the advantage is then you're the expert, I guess you could say, in those episodes. People get to know you more that way, and versus like when you're interviewing, it's more the guests that they're really getting to know, which is fine. So what I do, I have they're primarily interview, but I do solo episodes here and there about
so you mix them
specific. Yeah.
I was just saying, there's no rule, is there? Right? It's your show, right? I think what part of the people think is they Google something and some expert says, "Oh, you should do it this way," so they think that's the rule, right? But it's not. You can just it's your show, it's your business. You can break the rules, right?
Right. Yeah. So I recommend kind of doing both, or even trying both and seeing what you like better, what works better.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I think it's coming up with that concept, and I think playing around with it. So, like I said, if it doesn't work out, the podcast doesn't work out, just start another one, right? It's not like it costs any money to do anything at the moment. So, and it's very interesting that Amazon sort of got into it now, like basically Amazon Music. Because what we do is that we lodge, because we did some filming and we were involved in some production, some TV shows in LA, we're able to put things on IMDb. And so we actually list all the podcast guests on IMDb, so they come up as actors on basically, right? It's kind of weird. But if they're famous, right, so they've actually got a listing on the industry database. And they actually made an extra option early on to put podcasting in, and then suddenly out of the blue comes this podcasting music, Amazon Music thing. And so they're trying to compete with the likes of Apple, because from my understanding, statistically, is that the vast majority of people who listen to podcasts are Apple users. They're Apple, have got an Apple phone. And the fact that, at the end of the day, an Apple user is probably the most sought after marketing target in the world, because basically they usually can afford, if they can afford an Apple phone, they can probably afford to buy something.
Right.
And that kind of target market. So it's kind of interesting how it's sort of pigeonholed itself into that situation, and now everybody's trying to get into it. And I think it's interesting. Like, I was probably aware of this thing called Clubhouse. And it kind of scared the hell out of podcasters for some reason. They said, it's going to be the end of podcasting or something like that. It's like, no, it's not, because it's live. You can't you can't basically record anything at this moment in time. And so it was interesting that they sort of again, they released it to the iPhone users only. They still haven't put out an Android version. So you can kind of see that they know that that's the target market. So I guess if you're into podcasting, you got to think about who's listening to it. Just look at who's using an iPhone, and you'll know kind of possibly who's listening to it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the majority of podcast listeners listen through Apple Podcasts. I hadn't really thought about that though with Clubhouse. I know that it's only available on Apple right now, but I didn't really think about the fact that, maybe that was intentional. That's interesting.
I think, because because they originally started with celebrities and stuff like that, so they would have had to have an issue where they go to the celeb, well, can you be on Clubhouse? And they go, well, I've only got an Apple phone, or I've only got an Android phone, whatever. So they must have sort of looked at that scenario at the time and thought, well, we have to make it the most convenient, because it's much harder to write an Apple app than it is to write an Android app. Much harder to get approved. Like we do app publishing, so we can get a Google app up in a day, done, dusted, approved, live. Apple takes 2-3 weeks, longer sometimes, and they got to approve it. They check every single thing. If they don't like anything, they come back and ask about it. So the reality is that it would have been a lot harder. That would actually simpler for them to do Google in the first place. It would have been far simpler.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so there you go. So it's like when you're looking from the outside world, sometimes you look and say, why do they do that? And it's probably why. Or it could simply just been a complete accident, and the CEO's only got an Apple phone and he wanted to do it in that one. It's like sometimes you give people too much credit, but I think these guys seem pretty smart. So I think, and they were quite smart about saying that you're not supposed to record it either. So technically, you can't say, I'm going to do a Clubhouse, I'm going to stick it on my podcast, because technically you can't do it. So I think in some respects it's certainly not the end of podcasting. If anything, it's going to enhance it. But it'd be interesting to see how that sort of evolves from there. But that proves that audio is still very popular. Because one person said to me quite a while back, and I think it's quite true, is that very rarely does audio, or that you can think of, but goes viral, right? Video goes viral. Text can go viral, but very rarely does audio go viral. And so I think that's interesting that even in this day and age, radio is still pretty successful. It's because people want to consume stuff on demand, and they don't want to have to look at it, right? So I think that audio is such a big medium that's certainly not going to go away. I don't reckon it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, I think what's nice about audio and why it's so popular, I think, is because you can multitask when you do it. You could be driving or doing the dishes or whatever and listen to an hour-long podcast, or you're much more likely to listen to an hour-long show and really get to know, like, and trust the host versus, if you're reading a book, you're watching or reading a blog or watching a YouTube video, it involves your eyes and your focus and attention. And so you might not even finish that book, blog, or video. And so, I think the consumption is just a lot higher with podcasting and audiobooks.
Yeah. And that's another booming area too. Actually, we just put another audiobook on another book I just got involved in, and it's like audio's going through the roof. So I think I think the pandemic probably changed a few things there, because podcasters said to me that a lot of their downloads went down initially as people adjusted to the new life and sort of built their podcast sort of regimen into a new life that they went on the train or whatever, listening to it when they were going to work. So I think there was a bit of a reset there, but I think it's quite interesting. So if you want to start something on a shoestring, right? So we got how to start a online business for $5 and maintain it for under $100 a month. So is that how would you go about doing that?
So I think it's important for no matter what kind of business you have, to have a website. A lot of people think, well, just having a social media or a Facebook page is all you need. And it's important to have social media, but you definitely should have a website, because that's like owning land versus renting land, because you never know what's going to happen with social media. Like, will these channels be around in 10 years? Algorithms are always changing. Your posts, unless you pay to boost it, only like 1% to 2% of your followers are seeing it. And anyway, so definitely have a website, which for that, I mean, you have to have a domain, which you can go to oneandone.com and get a domain for $1. That's where I get all mine. And then if you use WordPress, you just have to have a host, which depending on who you go with, it could be as low as $3 a month. Or you could do like Wix or Weebly or Squarespace. And that might be more like $10 a month. But so yeah, what I did, I just got the domain, the website, and then you could create a free logo in Canva or pay someone like $5 in Fiverr, and then get an email list started. It's important to get that started right away. What I use is called SendFox, and like your first, I think, 1,000 subscribers are free. So it's free to get started. But what I really like about it, especially for a content creator like a podcaster, YouTuber, blogger, is that you can put in your YouTube link or your podcast or blog RSS feed, and it'll automatically generate a weekly newsletter with all your latest podcast episodes and blog posts. So it saves a lot of time. But there's some other free ones out there like MailChimp and MailerLite. So really you could get started for, roughly around $5, just because no matter what you're doing, you should have all that in place. And then depending on what you're doing, if you're podcasting, coaching, consulting, blogging, affiliate marketing, dropshipping, depending on what you're doing, you might need to spend money for that specific niche. Like for podcasting, for example, I bought an ATR 2100 mic, which I think was like $60 or $80. So I started my
thing to do, right? Buy a decent mic. Don't go too cheap on your mic, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's a USB mic. It plugs right into your computer, and then there's free recording and editing software like Audacity, and so depending on what you're doing, there might be some extra costs here or there, but I've been able to run my businesses for under $100 a month, and right now I'm doing like 40 to 60 a month. So it's possible. And what's nice about online business is that you don't have the overhead like with a brick and mortar or retail location.
Paying rent.
Yeah.
Paying rent and insurance and all that sort of stuff.
Rent, insurance, liability. All that stuff. You don't have to have an inventory really, usually depends on what you're doing, but usually not.
And I mean, if you're doing that, then it's a different business entirely anyway. So I think, I think it's interesting we talk about there, because part of what we did, and you wouldn't know about this, but basically one of the things we did is we developed our own podcast solution for podcasters. And what we do, it's called Evolvepreneur.app, so it happens to be on the end there in the club. Yeah. And so what we did is we looked at the scenario of what you just spoke about in terms of, the complexity of having to think about what you need to do, I think one of the things that people forget is that you said about domain names is they think, I won't bother with the domain name. I'll just redirect it to the podcast, iTunes or something like that, which I think is the laziest thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's probably comes really under lazy marketing. Or, you have a website, but then they struggle to kind of keep that content up. And so, and the other thing that I've seen a lot of people do is they don't own their own feed. So they basically go to a podcast place and they'll sign up for, say, cloud, SoundCloud or something like that, and they'll use that feed in everywhere. And the problem with that is that if you stop using SoundCloud, the feed's gone. Mm-hmm. And so then you can't shift to anything else. They kind of tie you in. So part of what we do with our own platform is say, okay, well, you register your domain, mypodcast.com, and then make sure that RSS feed that gets created that you've got to put in all these podcast distributions is from that domain name. So that way you can control it. You don't end up in a bad situation where you're stuck with, I'd say, someone who may even go broke, right? A podcast hosting company go broke, and then you're stuck, right? Mm-hmm. So that was sort of one area we looked at, and then we said, well, okay, could we create a ability for them to host it on their own website? Yep, we did that. So the idea was that they could create a podcast episode, upload it to their own platform, and then it would automatically generate a show page, and then allow them to collect subscribers, and then at the same time automatically email any subscriber out with a new email with the new podcast episode when it came out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and mainly because I wanted all this, because I didn't want to have to do it myself, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like we looked around and we realised that there's very few offerings out there where they can get subscribers onto their podcast. So you can go to these hosting companies and you can actually sign up for it. But when you subscribe, if they even allow it, they don't give you the email address. They keep it for themselves. And so you're not building your market, because they know if you do that, then you're building your own market. So we have the ability in our software to do that. So then you subscribe, and then that's handled inside your system. The email's then handled in, so you don't have to worry about getting an email program necessarily. And so you've got rid of the hosting, so you don't have to worry about hosting. You've got rid of the emailing. You've got an automatically built website that generates the homepage and everything on your own domain. So now you own the whole thing, right? You don't have a situation where you're beholden to anybody. And then you're distributing out to the various podcast companies, so that way you're the central source. And I think that's the important thing I find with podcasters is they dig themselves in a bit of a hole because they've got their own, they've used one platform, they can't get out of it, they think, although we found out a way you could do that. And so you could shift from within one place and another, because what happens is when you launch a podcast and you put that episode up there on iTunes, they automatically give it a number, and that number's unique. And if that number changes, then they assume it's a new episode, and they wipe out all your stats.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the danger. So people change to another podcast company and suddenly say, oh, my stats are going down. So it's because Apple thought you changed your whole episode thing, so they wiped it all and started again. Good luck. There you're gone. Lost a whole lot. And so we set that up at like $49 a month to allow someone to actually have that whole thing. But in the back end, they can sell products, they can create a course, they can sell their book, they can create blogs, they can do everything they normally would do, say, on a WordPress site, plus, say, if you had Kajabi or something like that. So that was kind of, I want to show you this afterwards, like, if I get a chance. But what I found was that was the problem with most podcasters, is that they got stuck or made the wrong decisions in that first initial stages, which meant they had to then fix it up later if it became popular. And it became messy for VAs and stuff like that. So, and you would have noticed when you went through our system, you went through a guest system. Yeah.
I noticed on, I've checked that out on Evolvepreneur.app and was pretty impressed with all the things you could do, but I didn't know about the thing that you just described about the podcast feed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we also create a profile. So what happened when you filled out that form, and I think this is kind of a bigger story in automation, right? So I got you to fill out an application form. Inside the application form, you said, what's my social media links and all that sort of stuff. And most people think you're just asking that because we want to know. And we do. But the real reason for it is that we automatically create a profile for you based on what you tell us. So your profile is now a public profile sitting on our platform with all your email links and all your social media, which I didn't have to go and remember and type in later. And so that's just an automatic process of that. So as soon as we create the episode, we just link it to your name, and then suddenly your profile's linked to that name, and we're done.
Wow.
So the laziest way to do podcast as possible was the theory in doing that. So I think that's the piece that, in my opinion, was missing in the I guess the industry, is that there was nobody really looking after the podcaster. In my opinion, they were trying to look after themselves, to build off. Almost like Amazon works on the theory that, if you put a book up there or any content up there, they've got something to sell. Without you, they've got no one, right? And so I think that's that scenario of the same thing with podcast companies. If they can have you hosting your podcast on their platform, then they're going to get more traffic, and it's good for them. Hence probably why a lot of them do it for free. So I think you need to know what you're going in for. I think if it's free, you are probably the product in that situation. So I think asking the questions early on about what's important in a podcast process that you get set up properly, I think is a good idea. And for us, it always felt like strategy was a good idea too, to actually have some sort of idea of why you were trying to do it. So, so end of lecture. But I thought it was important to kind of whip it in there because, so, I mean, was that part of our idea was, as you said, about social media, right? If you get caught in a situation where you've set up your podcast, say, on a Facebook page, and you can't get back into that, then you've lost your entire audience. You've lost everything. And so I think owning your own podcast, I think, is important. It's like anything else in any sort of marketing, is that if you don't own your own stuff, then someone else owns it, and you're renting it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
So okay, affiliate marketing. That's interesting. That's another one. So we're talking. You mentioned a bit about doing some affiliate marketing and drop shipping. So what was that all about? Was that to do with your book?
Well, so I still do some affiliate marketing through the podcast, and there is some in the book, actually. And basically, and it's only stuff that I use and recommend. But, well, if people aren't familiar with what affiliate marketing is you're basically promoting someone else's service or product, and then if someone were to click on that link that's maybe in your show notes or your blog, or some people even do it like in the description on a YouTube video, things like that, then you'll get a commission on that. And so every now and then, like, say I have someone on my show who has a book. Well, in the show notes, I'll link to the book, but it'll be my Amazon affiliate link.
Yep.
Or if I have someone on who has a software program, or maybe I'm doing a solo episode about a particular software program that I use, I'll use the affiliate link in the show notes, and even in the episode itself, I'll either it'll be my website, thesarahstjohn.com/whatever the software product or whatever is, and either that'll go
to remember, right? So don't go sticking in some affiliate link that might expire, so that you can't change later, right?
Yeah, there's that. Plus, affiliate links are usually very hard. Like, if you're talking about it on a podcast, there's numbers and letters and all kinds of stuff. It's like this. Yeah. So I create with WordPress, it's called pretty links, and you can just or you could create a page on your website, I guess. That
I've seen people, like, that's what we've sort of seen what people do. They'll just go, thepodcastshow.com/special offer, and then they can basically just redirect it where they like. And I think that's that's important if you're going to get into it, because obviously with that sort of affiliate thing, then you can get some revenue from your show. But there's not just one way of making money from a podcast show, right? Is there? Like, affiliate marketing's a nice way to do it, because people are more inclined to click. I think you get a higher conversion rate, I reckon, based off that scenario.
Yeah, I think affiliate marketing is definitely for podcasting or blogging or even a YouTube channel. Are definitely good ways to monetize that. It's one of my favorite ways to, and it's kind of passive. Once you put out the podcast or the video tutorial of the thing that you're talking about or whatever, it becomes passive at that point to any kind of commissions you earn.
Yeah, you do it once and then you just keep getting the money, right? It's quite cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of my other favourite subjects is recurring income, because I think a lot of people they think about the one-off thing. So, I mean, some people might charge to go on a podcast show and they think, okay, that's great. But the reality is if they did a deal with that person and said, look, I tell you what, if I send you business, you'll pay me some commission, you'd probably make far more money out of long term out of that than you ever would out of that little short form time, like $100 or whatever you might make out of that guest.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I love affiliate marketing.
Yes. Okay. So if you were starting again in terms of what you've done and like you learned the last 10 years, what would you say to yourself early on if you were saying to the younger self, say, hey, look, don't do that or do this? What do you think the piece of advice would be?
I would say to avoid shiny object syndrome. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have this problem, and I certainly did and kind of still do from time to time, but at least I'm aware of it now.
Yeah, you've got a problem, right?
Yeah.
And also domain buying syndrome, I call it. Like you start buying domains.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yes, I think it should be like a domain anonymous thing where people can go and admit they've got a problem, right?
Well, one time, so I buy my domains on 1-on-1, like I said, for $1.
$1, so pretty good.
And then someone contacted me out of the blue for this domain I had that I wasn't really using yet. I had ideas for it, so I went ahead and got it, but I didn't end up doing anything with it by this point. And someone like a domain broker contacted me saying that they had someone interested in buying it. Anyway, I ended up selling them the domain for, I think, like $700 or something.
Nice. Yes.
So, and that was, it wasn't even my intention to buy the domain and then flip it or sell it, but it just kind of happened. So I was like, oh, well, that's a pretty good profit, 700% profit.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And the other thing too is that as time goes on, the good domains will become harder to get. It's a bit like real estate, right? The best streets in the city are going to stay the best streets in the city, right? So ultimately, so they're always going to be better off. So I think sometimes people forget about that, and I think also, in my opinion, is that if you get a domain, redirect it somewhere. Don't leave it dead. Because two things happen out of that. One, it's harder to find you if they do want to give you the money for it. And secondly, it actually matures then. So it's worth more. So if you actually have something that actually goes somewhere and they can see traffic to it at least, then it's going to probably worth more than a dead domain that they've got nothing, because Google's never linked it. Google's never looked at it because it doesn't exist. It just, no, wrong problem. No problem, go with that one. Don't link that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So worst case scenario, create a page on the website saying, I'm going to get around to using this domain one day.com, and then send them all to that one, so at least you don't leave them dead, because that's what we do that quite a lot of domains. I mean, and I think the danger is that if you buy too many domains and you've got this brilliant idea that you never use it for, try the idea out on your own website first. And if you get enough traffic, then perhaps go domain wise. But the trouble is I found is if you start searching a domain name that you've thought of, if you don't buy that domain name very quickly, the likes of GoDaddy actually indexes that and actually goes and buys it. And so then suddenly you buy it, you think, oh, very good idea, and the next day you go looking for it. What's happened is they've indexed it and figured it out, and so they went and bought it. So then you have to pay more for it. So
interesting.
So if you ever go searching for domains, don't search on Google for domains and stuff, because they will figure it out and you'll end up paying more. So
yeah. Oh yeah, like if you were to search directly on Google.com.
Yeah, some people they go to, even GoDaddy is a good example of that. I mean, I use GoDaddy for a few things, like as an example. But those sites where you actually go and search on their site for the domain, you think you're innocently just searching. What they're doing is building out that traffic and figuring out that you're interested. And if someone else searches for it, then suddenly that domain becomes purchased by them, and then suddenly it's cost more money. So that's the way they make money.
Yeah.
So so if you're going to buy that domain, then buy that domain.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Don't dilly-dally around and think, I'm going to buy it tomorrow, because then you think, somebody else bought it. How come they bought it? So they didn't. They just, they basically knocked off the idea from you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, so just in summary, like, and we'll put these links up on the website because you've got the sarahstjohn.com, which is pretty easy to spell. And then you've got one there for a webinar. Obviously, is that a free webinar that someone can come to listen? Is that what happens there?
Yeah, so I have a couple of free things. The webinar, the sarahstjohn.com/webinar, which that's basically it's about a 30-minute webinar, and I go over basically why you should have a podcast and how it will advance your business, basically. And then I have 3 books that I give away for free, the PDF version. At thesarahstjohn.com/free.
Cool. It's good, man. You got to remember the domain name. You got to make it easier to remember yourself, right?
Yeah. And that's Sarah with an H, and then St. John is STJOHN. Yep. Unfortunately, Sarah St. John was taken, so I had to put the at the front. Speaking of, domain names.
Yeah, that's always the trouble. Like, we get a lot of people who have to register books and they can't get the book name, and so we just say, well, my book named the book, right? Yeah. So stick something else in front of it. Most people haven't thought of that. So yeah, exactly. And it makes it more official, right? It makes it sound like you're special. Like you had to have an official "the" in front of it because. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really like talking about podcasting. I'll probably do it for hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the same there. So I really appreciate your insights in there. And I think, as you say, like podcasting is probably, to me, is a simpler way to do marketing. And you can prove to people that you know what you're talking about. I mean, and to me, they also will listen longer. Because everybody's got attention deficit disorder now, right? So they just bounce out and it's not very long. So podcasting, they'll hang in there normally if it's of interest to them. So I think it's a great medium to work with. Yeah.
And then also if anyone's interested in starting a podcast or has one but needs help with the production, the podcast production agency is PodSeam.com, PodSeam. Cool. And I'm creating a course right now. It's not out yet. It's on pre-sale. And that's podcastprofitpro.com.
Nice. There you go. You've got some good domain names there, haven't you?
Yeah.
Oh dear, it's so very hard to come up with some. Some people come up with some crazy domain names. You think, what were you thinking when you did that domain name? Like, do you really think anybody could spell that? I think it's really hard to remember. So really appreciate your time, Sarah, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.